Today's discussion, we are talking about earthquakes. We concluded our last discussion with plate boundaries, and we have already indicated that it's along plate boundaries where earthquakes take place, because the, that is where uh, seismic activities are taking place. Now, across the globe, there are several seismic uh, stations or seismological recording stations worldwide that are put in place in order to be able to detect slight movements within the earth crust. And such uh, seismological recording stations are distributed all over the world, including Namibia. So we have a seismic station found in Namibia, largely located around Tsumeb area. If you visit Tsumeb area, you would find that there is a seismic station out there, and all those seismic stations are meant to record movement within the earth, to be able to tell places where earthquakes are taking place across the globe. So now, that is why earthquakes are linked to plate tectonic boundaries. And depending on what a plate boundary is, tells the depth where such earthquakes take place. For example, shallow earthquakes are largely associated with divergent and transform boundaries, while intermediate and deep earthquakes are largely associated with convergent uh, boundaries. So that means, depending on the kind of plate boundary you have, it's likely to tell the depth at which earthquakes are to take place. For example, here we have a diverging plate boundary where South America is drifting away from Africa. That is why here we get to experience earthquakes that are occurring at shallow, or basically earthquakes that have shallow focus. Whereas here we have earthquakes at different depths taking place. You have both deep, intermediate, and shallow earthquakes taking place. So earthquakes have been measured, or earthquake epicenters have been recorded, or there has been measurement for many, many years. This is a database, for example, between 1963 and 1998, of which 358,214 events were recorded. So you can clearly see the distribution of earthquakes around the globe, and you can clearly see that they are associated with uh, plate boundaries. And the most of the continents, mainland continents, the interior of continents, are almost clear of earthquakes, with a few exemptions. For example, East Africa is a very seismic place, and earthquakes tend to take place from time to time. Sure, the Pacific Rim of Fire. This is really a place where earthquakes tend to take place from time to time. We have earthquakes taking place in the Himalayas. We have earthquakes taking place along here. So earthquakes are largely associated with plate boundaries. Uh, Now, convergent plate boundaries, that is where I have said plates are converging toward each other. That is associated with more frequent earthquakes as opposed to divergent plate boundary. But we also have continental earthquakes, earthquakes that are occurring within the continental crust. Earthquakes taking place, for example, along the San Andreas Fault in the United States. Earthquake taking place within the continental lift valleys, for example, East Africa lift valleys, Kenya, Ethiopia, and the likes. Earthquake taking place in collision zones such as the Himalayas and the Alps. So we have earthquakes taking place across different uh, uh, plate boundaries. Now, in Namibia, we also have seismic events taking place. And over the last 100 years, we have been recording seismic activities taking place both in Namibia and South Africa, so it's Botswana. But those usually are small events, and such vibrations can only be felt at a very small scale. So that is very important for you to understand that even where you are, there's a potential for an earthquake to take place.